咱就说买了2年的车。
I've had this car for 2 years. Is this normal? The engine air filter housing is completely brittle. And look at the soundproofing material. It falls apart just by touching it. The air filter is over here, but I have to wait to get a new one because it's hard to find this part in Ürümqi, Xinjiang.
On February 23rd, the owner of a BYD Han electric vehicle posted a video saying that he drove from Shandong to Xinjiang province, and as soon as he arrived in Ürümqi, his car had already fallen apart. The car was only driven 500,000 kilometers, but the engine air filter housing has crumbled. He hopes BYD will address this issue and improve the quality of these parts. One commenter responded, BYD increases production by 1 million cars every year, so this kind of quality is expected. Another said, BYD forced its entire supply chain to cut prices by 10%. What did you think would happen? Someone else shared their experience. BYD's quality control is just bad. Don't ask me how I know. I bought a new BYD Han, and in the first week, I hit a small pothole, and the ABS warning light turned on. On my way to the service center, I hit another pothole, and it turned off by itself. Now, in the second year, this has happened 3 times, even once on the highway. Social media is filled with complaints from BYD owners. This is embarrassing. My BYD Song Pro is only 4 years old, and the air filter cover has aged so badly that it's falling apart. What kind of cheap materials are they using? Don't they understand that this part is exposed to high temperatures? There's a hole in the intake pipe. Who knows if that's affecting anything? The cover is so worn out that the screws won't even tighten. BYD, can you replace this cover for free?
Don't buy BYD. It's the worst Chinese EV brand, hands down. I was one of the first to buy the BYD Han, and it was supposed to have an 80-kilometer pure electric range. Now, even with a full charge, it barely reaches 20 kilometers. I took the car to an official BYD service center, and their technicians confirmed that the real range is only 20 kilometers, even though the temperature was 15 degrees Celsius at the time. We sent the test data to BYD headquarters, but they still insisted the battery was normal. I want to ask BYD, your battery has lost 80% of its capacity, and you call this normal? How shameless can you be? The company's response? No warranty, no responsibility, no solution. Everyone, wake up. BYD is low quality, a scam, an industrial disgrace. Stay away from BYD and this garbage company.
In the comments, someone shared a photo of their 2022 BYD Chin with a large rusted hole in the body. Many netizens started mocking the idea of supporting domestic brands, saying it's nothing but a scam and a tax on gullible consumers. Some sarcastic comments include, domestic brands have it tough. Let's all tolerate it and support them. If you don't buy and he doesn't buy, are you saying I have to buy? Young men, be patriotic. Don't complain. This is what they call the pride of China. No matter what, BYD is still far ahead. On X, one user criticized Chinese manufacturing, saying, Chinese companies always cut corners and take shortcuts. Their materials are way behind. Take car frames and body panels, for example. Japanese cars use galvanized steel that's thin but lasts 15 years without rusting. It's flexible, fatigue-resistant, and doesn't damage stamping molds. But domestic steel? It wears out the molds, needs frequent maintenance, and has a high defect rate. The gap is massive. Even in 100 years, they won't catch up. The thing you love most is what exploits you the hardest. Beyond poor quality, spontaneous fires in these cars are another major concern. People are also reflecting on Made in China 2025, the ambitious manufacturing plan the Chinese Communist Party launched 10 years ago. Back then, the government vowed to transform China from the world's factory into a high-tech manufacturing powerhouse within a decade. New energy vehicles were one of the 10 key industries they aimed to develop. They claimed that they would lead the Green Revolution, surpass the West in technology, and dominate global electric vehicle markets. But now, as the plan nears its end, the results are embarrassing. Streets are filled with low-quality EVs. Angry owners flood social media with complaints. Looking back, China started pouring money into EVs in 2009 with subsidies, tax breaks, and charging infrastructure projects, similar to the steel production frenzy during the Great Leap Forward. When Made in China 2025 launched, government subsidies skyrocketed, and local officials aggressively pushed EV projects. Many companies with no experience in car manufacturing jumped in just to grab subsidies. What was the result? Factories were built at lightning speed all over the country, and production capacity skyrocketed overnight. Many companies had no real expertise and were only surviving on subsidies. Within months, they shut down, leaving behind what people now call zombie factories. Worse yet, many of the cars produced couldn't even be sold, ended up collecting dust in car graveyards. Even after so many automakers went bankrupt, overproduction remained a serious issue. In 2023, China's car manufacturing capacity reached 15 million vehicles, but only 9.5 million were actually sold, meaning less than 60% of the capacity was being used. The same happened with EV batteries. China had a total production capacity of 1,000 gigawatt-hours, but actual demand was only 600 gigawatt-hours. In short, this massive car manufacturing boom left nothing but a mess. By 2022, when subsidies were cut, demand shrank as well. To avoid financial collapse, companies desperately tried to sell their cars at any cost, triggering a brutal price war. Some consumers were thrilled, thinking they could finally afford a car. But what did they actually get? Not a car, but more like a ticking time bomb. Problems popped up constantly, repairs were endless, and cases of spontaneous fires kept making the news. And how can any car company survive by selling cars at a loss? Cheap products are never high quality, and high-quality products are never cheap. This simple truth never changes. On February 23rd, a TikToker discussed the truth behind China's cheap cars and price wars, sparking a heated debate among netizens.
Don't expect great quality when buying a new car during a price war. If it runs, that's good enough. Why are you expecting more? A few years ago, when eggs cost 0.5 yuan each, a car this class sold for 200,000 yuan. Now eggs cost 1 yuan each, and the car is selling for 150,000 yuan. Do you really think car companies are doing charity work? Anyone in the automotive industry, especially in the supply chain, knows exactly what's been happening in recent years. What kind of quality do you think you're getting when a car's price suddenly drops by 30,000 or 50,000 yuan?
He highlights a major issue with Chinese cars today: rust. Some new cars start rusting in just a few months, while others last 2 or 3 years before showing serious rust problems. And it's not just the chassis. Some cars even have rust forming inside the doors, eating through from the inside out. This is all because of cost cutting. Automakers are skipping crucial anti-rust treatments during production, unlike joint venture brands, which follow more thorough and detailed processes. The second problem is the materials used. In the past, no one would have ever considered using cold-rolled steel for car bodies. It was just unheard of. But after the price war began, some manufacturers started using it. Joint venture brands always used double-sided galvanized steel, but now many Chinese EV makers have switched to cold-rolled steel, which rusts much faster. The thickness of the metal used in car bodies has also decreased. Before, sheet metal was 2 millimeters, 1.7 or 1.8 millimeters thick. Now it's 1.5 or even as thin as 1.2 millimeters. The trend is only getting thinner. On some new cars, the front hood and trunk lid are so thin they're basically just a layer of sheet metal. You can press on them with your hand and they feel flimsy. How can this be good quality? Third, many automakers have replaced high-pressure resin fuel tanks with metal fuel tanks. There's no doubt that resin tanks are more expensive, so switching to metal tanks is just another way to cut costs. Then there's the issue of glass. Some cars, while being driven normally, the windshield or rear window just falls out, and it's not the glass itself that's defective. The problem is with the adhesive used to secure it. In the past, car companies used high-quality adhesives from Henkel, a German supplier. But now, in order to save money, some brands have switched to cheap domestic adhesives. And as a result, the adhesive doesn't hold, and after a short time, the glass starts coming loose. The TikToker also pointed out something important.
Aren't obvious when you first buy a new car. Even after a few months of use, you might not notice anything, but after 2 or 3 years, the problems become clear. For example, some cars come with so-called genuine leather seats, but after a year or two, they start cracking. The same goes for genuine leather steering wheels. The surface peels off. Why? Because they're made from the cheapest materials possible. But let's talk about how automakers constantly pressure suppliers to lower prices, dropping by 10% year after year. The suppliers still need to make a profit, right? They're not going to work for free. So what happens when prices are cut too much? The quality of parts declines and precision standards drop. That's why some people find that small buttons or switches inside their cars feel rough or even sharp enough to cut their fingers. It's all because the molds used to manufacture these parts are low precision, just good enough to work, and that's it.
He also pointed out a key issue with the computer chips used in modern cars. He said, some people might not realize this, but automotive chips are different from consumer-grade chips used in smartphones. Car-grade chips are built for stability, with high resistance to dust, vibration, and extreme temperatures. While they might not be as cutting-edge as consumer chips, they're designed for long-term reliability. But car-grade chips take longer to produce and are more expensive. So what are many Chinese automakers doing? Replacing them with consumer-grade chips instead. The problem is that these chips easily overheat and aren't built to withstand constant persistent vibrations, so you get cars where the central touchscreen suddenly freezes or blacks out while driving. Another major issue is how car companies are handling testing. He said, previously, new cars had to go through a strict and comprehensive set of tests before hitting the market, and now the priority is speed. Get the car on sale as fast as possible. And any quality issues, let the consumers deal with them. If a test can't be completed on time, just skip it. These cost-cutting shortcuts are especially common in low-priced domestic cars, but some brands don't just limit this to their budget models. It's happening across all their lineups, from low-end to high-end. The TikToker summed it up. You get what you pay for. In a price war, don't expect good quality for a bargain price. But what this TikToker revealed is just the tip of the iceberg. There are far more hidden issues that most consumers don't even know about. It's no wonder some people joke. We thought car companies were competing on technology. Turns out they're competing to see who can cut corners the most. We thought they were lowering prices to benefit customers. Turns out they're making customers risk their lives. From chip shortages to moral shortages, Chinese car makers have long abandoned safety in favor of boosting the country's GDP numbers. Meanwhile, state media keeps pushing the narrative of domestic brands rising to power. But what's really rising? Cheap, poorly built cars that fall apart in a few years. In a country where even homes are only granted a 70-year lease, having a car that lasts 3 years without rusting is now considered high quality. Some netizens mocked the situation. China's so-called leading edge in manufacturing is just built on cutting corners and fooling people. The EV boom turned into a race to build disposable cars that barely last a few years. This isn't a manufacturing powerhouse, it's a junk-producing superpower. Others pointed out the deeper issue behind China's manufacturing boom. Think about it. These cars are built by overworked and underpaid laborers who are full of resentment. Meanwhile, in other countries, factory workers have stable jobs, 30 days of annual leave, and a strong safety net even if they get laid off. How can you expect the same level of quality? The rise of Chinese manufacturing is soaked in the blood and sweat of exploited workers. Wages keep dropping. 10-hour workdays are the norm, and without overtime pay, they can't even support their families. No benefits, no security, just endless exhaustion. This so-called rise is nothing more than workers being squeezed dry, with profits flowing straight into the pockets of the CCP and corporate elites. But here's the strange part. Despite all the cost-cutting, most Chinese EV companies are still losing billions. How are they surviving despite such massive losses? A recent video from another TikToker might have the answer.
The biggest scam in the world right now is being pulled off by the bosses of these electric vehicle companies. They're all selling at massive losses. Do you really think these billionaires are doing charity work, losing money just to be nice? The truth behind this is far more sinister than people realize. Let's look at some numbers. Huawei loses 30,000 yuan on every car it sells. Xiaomi, a 60,000 yuan loss per car. Other car companies are in even worse shape. XPeng has accumulated 38 billion yuan in losses. Hozon Auto, backed by 360, lost 18 billion yuan in just 3 years. Avatar, under Chang'an, has lost 8 billion yuan. No matter if it's an old brand or a new startup, as long as they're making EVs, they're losing money. So why do they keep pushing forward? It doesn't make sense unless there's something shady going on.
So, how are these EV companies actually making money? The truth is, they're not making money from selling cars at all. Instead, they're using the same tactics as major internet and tech platforms. They rely on capital markets, not actual products or services, to generate profits. Let's look at some of the biggest examples. Pinduoduo lost 14 billion yuan in 4 years. JD.com lost over 30 billion yuan in 12 years. Didi lost more than 50 billion yuan in 6 years. Meituan took it even further, burning through 115 billion yuan in 8 years. But now look at the personal fortunes of their founders. Pinduoduo's Huang Zheng is worth over 450 billion yuan. JD's Richard Liu has more than 110 billion yuan. Didi's Cheng Wei is worth more than 30 billion. Meituan's Wang Xing over 120 billion. And their investors? They've made even more. Their secret is in the endless cycle of funding rounds and stock market listings. The strategy is simple. Imagine someone starts a wholesale business, but instead of actually selling anything, they first give away 10% of their company to an angel investor in exchange for 500,000 yuan. Even though the company hadn't made a cent, it's now valued at 5 million yuan. Then comes the Series A funding round. Another 20% of the company is sold, raising 50 million yuan from institutional investors. The company is still losing money, but suddenly its valuation jumps to 250 million yuan. The first angel investor's 10% stake, which originally cost $500,000, is now worth $25 million, multiplying their investment 50 times over. Next, in Series B, another 20% of the company is sold for 500 million yuan, bringing the valuation to 2.5 billion yuan. If that angel investor cashes out at this stage, their 10% is now worth 250 million, a 500 times return. As new investors come in during Series C and Series D, they have only one goal: to keep inflating the company's valuation. Eventually, the company goes public in Shanghai, Hong Kong, or Nasdaq. Once the stock hits the market, the early investors cash out, leaving ordinary shareholders holding the bag.
Before investing, these people don't care whether the company is profitable or not. They're not interested in growing together with the business. What they care about is whether the company's valuation can keep rising and whether it has a shot at going public. The money they make comes from stock price inflation, not from selling actual products. Selling cars, that's pocket change compared to what they're really after.
This is exactly how the EV industry operates. On the surface, these companies seem to be losing money left and right, with unsold cars piling up in car graveyards. But as long as they can leverage government subsidies and policy support to inflate their market share, they can keep raising new funding rounds, boosting their valuation, and waiting for the perfect moment to cash out. Making money by actually selling cars? That was never the plan. Whether or not people buy their cars is irrelevant. What matters is whether the capital markets keep pumping money into them. That's why some EV companies appear to be on the brink of financial collapse, yet still seem to be thriving. Their real source of income isn't consumers, it's investors and the stock market. Of course, this scheme only works as long as there are new investors willing to buy in. But the moment subsidies are cut, the market cools down, or investors lose interest, the whole system collapses. Consumers are left with a pile of defective cars, while the financial backers walk away with their profits. So when people talk about how Chinese EV makers are leading a green revolution or surpassing the West, don't be fooled. It's not about national pride or revitalizing manufacturing. It's about a financial play to extract as much money from investors as possible. They're nothing more than marketing tools to fuel the investment cycle. And the saddest part is that ordinary people, manipulated by patriotism and state propaganda, end up as the biggest victims. They believe they're supporting a rising domestic industry, but in reality, they're just being taken for a ride. And what has Made in China 2025 actually achieved? Overproduction, poor quality, a flood of industrial waste, and tariffs blocking their imports. Car companies are too focused on chasing funding rounds to care about real innovation. Consumers are left holding the bag. In the end, this isn't a manufacturing miracle, it's just another financial bubble.